They called him the Wolf of the Winds. A shadow carved from the harshest lands beneath the eternal blue sky. No cradle rocked his infancy in comfort, and no lullaby softened his youth. He was born into hunger and exile, forged not by privilege but by the cold silence of betrayal and the searing heat of vengeance. His story begins with a theft, not of gold or cattle, but of status. His father, once a chieftain of their wandering tribe, had been poisoned by rivals. His mother, cast out with her children, learned quickly that mercy was a myth in the open steppe. They scavenged for roots. They hunted rats. And when hunger stretched too long, they chewed leather and swallowed pride. He was only a boy when he learned to kill. The boy became a man with a bow in his hands and fury in his heart. But long before he commanded armies, long before cities fell under his banners like wheat to a scythe, there was a girl. Her name was Borte. A daughter of a neighboring tribe, Borte was promised to him when both were barely children. Their marriage was a whisper of peace in a world that screamed war. She was not a woman of softness, but of strength, equal parts steel and silk. She saw in him not the hungry wolf but the man who could lead not through fear, but through fire and focus. For a period of time, it seemed love might blunt the blade of ambition. But the steppes are cruel, and peace is fragile. One day, raiders came. Borte was stolen, taken by an enemy clan to be humiliated, used, broken. He gathered every man he could muster, only a handful, and rode into the teeth of danger. He brought her back. But something inside him broke that day. Some say it was mercy. Others say it was the belief that any man could be trusted. From then on, the man who once sought unity turned to domination. He learned the language of blood. He no longer made allies, only vassals or corpses. Every tribe that had once mocked him was driven to their knees. Some bent quickly. Others resisted and were erased from the earth. His tactics were brutal, his retribution biblical. Cities that dared defy him were burned to ash. Rivers ran red for days. He ordered mountains of skulls to be built as warnings to all who might dream of defiance. Women were not spared. In truth, they became his greatest obsession. He took them in the hundreds. Then thousands. From Chinese princesses to Persian noblewomen, from the daughters of sultans to the wives of slain enemies. Some were taken as spoils, others gifted by terrified kings hoping to delay their doom. He didn't distinguish love from conquest. Where he laid siege, he also laid claim. And yet, in the cold silence of his tent, in the moments between conquest and cruelty, he still called for her. Borte. His queen. His anchor. No other woman sat beside him during councils of war. No other woman's sons were considered worthy heirs. Her eyes, full of defiance and sorrow, reminded him of the boy he once was, starving but human. He built an empire not with dreams, but with nightmares. His rule stretched from the freezing forests of Siberia to the golden deserts of Persia. A single command from his lips could silence a continent. His soldiers believed him invincible. His enemies believed him divine punishment. But in the quiet hours, when no one dared enter his presence, he still wore the small token Borte had woven for him in youth, a braid of horsehair, still black despite the decades, a relic of loyalty amid oceans of betrayal. He never stopped conquering. His armies tore through lands like wildfire. His banners, black as night, became omens of extinction. But he also forged a world order. He allowed scholars to travel unharmed, protected trade routes across thousands of miles, and unified languages and currencies. Civilization advanced beneath the boot of the beast. And through it all, his bloodline spread like locusts on the wind. He had hundreds of children, perhaps thousands. Through rape, concubinage, and arranged marriages, his seed took root in every corner of the world he touched. Centuries later, scientists would trace his Y chromosome across millions of men, 1 in every 200 alive today, they would claim, carries his legacy. A man who died 8 centuries ago remains alive in the blood of Asia and beyond. Yet none of them knew his heart. None knew the boy who cried when his father died, the man who wept silently beside Borte when she returned defiled. None could understand the paradox, the cruelest man of his age still capable of tenderness, of love, even if only for one woman. He died without fanfare. His grave remains unknown, lost by design, hidden so none could desecrate it. But the earth itself remembers. The mountains, scorched by his fires, remember. The winds, still carrying whispers of his riders, remember. And history remembers. His name, when finally spoken, still chills the tongue. Genghis Khan. Who was Genghis Khan? Genghis Khan, his original name was Temujin. He was a Mongol conqueror who later established the largest contiguous land empire in human history. By the time of his death in 1227, his empire stretched from the Korean peninsula all the way to the Caspian Sea. It including large parts of Russia, China, the Middle East, and Central Asia, covering the entire Silk Road. He committed a number of genocides, culminating in the death of around 40 million people, or 11% of the world's population at the time. In stark contrast, despite the raping, pillaging, and destruction by the Mongol hordes, Genghis was tolerant of all religions in his empire and welcomed all creeds and cultures that did not oppose his rule. Genghis Khan's harem. On record Genghis Khan had 44 wives and concubines, but according to historians the total number of women in his harem was around 500, most of these women were from the people captured by Genghis Khan during his lifetime of conquest. Some were even gifted to him as tribute. His harem was so large, that it was divided in 4 camps called ordos. Each administered by one of his 4 principal wives, Borte, Kalan, Yesue, and Yesujin. Borte was recognized as the great empress and outranked the other 3 principal wives, each of the concubines had their own yurt. With a harem that numbered hundreds of women and with the Khan visiting several women every night, it is not a big leap of logic to assume that Genghis Khan had hundreds of children. Traditional claims that he had 120 children, which is certainly less than what is probable, especially when one factors in the genetic evidence from testing the DNA of people living today once covered by the Great Khan's empire. Genetics and doing the math. Just as the history books and historical evidence paint a glorious picture of the life of Genghis Khan and his military and intimate conquests, science has given us an even greater image with statistical data that reveals the massive size of this picture. In 2003, a study was conducted in which the Y chromosome of Asian populations was examined. The study showed that 8% of all the men living today in the areas previously under the control of Genghis Khan carry a Y chromosome that marks them as direct descendants of a patrilineal ancestor who lived 1,000 years ago in Mongolia. This figure is almost certainly Genghis Khan. This 8% represents about 0.5% of the world's total men, which is roughly 20 million. If this is doubled to also represent the female descendants of Genghis Khan, then 40 million people today are direct descendants of Genghis Khan, out of a world population of 8 billion. That's 1 in every 200 people on the planet.